Chapter 20 of Abraham Lincoln, A History, Volume 4. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Abraham Lincoln, A History, Volume 4, by John Hay and John George Nicolay. Chapter 20, Bull Run. It had been arranged that McDowell's advance against the enemy at Manassas should begin on July 9. By dint of extraordinary exertions, he was ready and issued his marching orders on July 16. But his organization was very imperfect, and his preparations were far from complete. Many of his regiments reached him but 2 days before, and some only on the day he moved. He started with barely wagons enough for his ammunition and hospital supplies. Tents, baggage, and rations were to follow. The utmost caution was enjoined to avoid another Vienna or Big Bethel disaster. 3 things, his marching orders said, would be held unpardonable. First, to come upon a battery or a breastwork without a knowledge of its position. Second, to be surprised. Third, to fall back. His army being a new, untried machine, his men unused to the fatigues and privations of a march, progress was slow. With a cumbersome movement, it felt its way towards Fairfax Courthouse and Centreville, the outposts of the enemy having sufficient time to retire as it advanced. Brigadier General Daniel Tyler commanded his 1st Division of 4 brigades, Colonel David Hunter the 2nd Division of 2 brigades, Colonel S.P. Heintzelman, the 3rd Division of 3 brigades, and Colonel Dixon S. Miles, the 5th Division of 2 brigades. The 4th Division under Brigadier General Theodore Runyon was left behind to guard communications. His total command embraced an aggregate of 34,320 men. His marching column proper consisted of a little less than 28,000 men, including artillery, a total of 49 guns, and a single battalion of cavalry. When on the morning of July 18 Tyler reached Centreville, he found that the enemy had everywhere retired behind the line of Bull Run, a winding, sluggish stream flowing southeasterly towards the Potomac, about 32 miles southwest of Washington. While it is fordable in many places, it generally has steep and sometimes precipitous and rocky banks with wooded heights on the west. 3 miles beyond the stream lies Manassas Junction on a high open plateau. Here the railroads from Richmond on the south and the Shenandoah Valley on the west come together. To protect this junction, the rebels had some slight field works, armed with 14 or 15 heavy guns, and garrisoned by about 2,000 men. Beauregard, in command since the 1st of June, had gathered an army of nearly 22,000 men and 29 guns. The independent command of T.H. Holmes, called up from Aquia Creek, augmented his force to a little over 23,000 men and 35 guns. Instead of keeping this about the Manassas earthworks, he had brought it close down to the banks of Bull Run and posted it along a line some 7 miles in length, extending from the Manassas Railroad to the stone bridge on the Warrenton Turnpike, and guarding the 5 intermediate fords. The enemy retired from Centreville as Tyler approached that place, and taking a light detachment to make a reconnaissance, he followed their main body towards the crossing of Bull Run at Blackburn's Ford, near the center of Beauregard's extended line. Tyler was under express orders to observe well the roads, but not to bring on an engagement. Apparently lured on, however, by the hitherto easy approach, his reconnaissance became a skirmish, and calling up support, the skirmish became a preliminary battle. Before he was well aware of it, 60 men had fallen, 2 exposed field pieces had been with difficulty extricated, 1 regiment had retreated in confusion, and 3 others were deployed in line of battle to make a new charge. At this point, Tyler remembered his instructions and called off his troops. This reverse at Blackburn's Ford, so apparently without necessity or advantage, seriously chilled the fine spirit in which the army started on its march. The attacking detachment did not then know that the enemy had suffered equal loss and demoralization. McDowell began his campaign with the purpose of turning the right flank of the enemy at Union Mills, but the examinations made on the 18th satisfied him that the narrow roads and rough country in that direction made such a movement impracticable. When, in addition, he heard Tyler's cannonade on the same day, he hurried forward his divisions to Centreville, but the report of that day's engagement also seemed to prove it inexpedient to make a direct attack. That night McDowell assembled his division commanders at Centreville and confidentially informed them that he had changed his original plan and resolved to march westward and turn Beauregard's left flank. All of Friday the 19th and Saturday the 20th were spent in an effort of the engineers to find an unfortified ford over Bull Run in that direction, and thus the main battle was postponed till Sunday, July 21. During those 2 days, while McDowell's army was supplied with rations, the strength of the enemy in his front was greatly increased. McDowell's movement was based upon the understanding and promise that Patterson should hold Johnston in the Shenandoah Valley, and General Scott made every exertion to redeem this promise. On the 13th, he directed Patterson to detain Johnston in the Valley of Winchester, and as the critical time approached, and hearing no official report from him for 3 whole days, he sent him a sharp admonition: "Do not let the enemy amuse and delay you with a small force in front, whilst he reinforces the Manassas Junction with his main body." And still more emphatically on the 18th, while the engagement of Blackburn's Ford was being fought by McDowell's troops, "I have certainly been expecting you to beat the enemy, if not to hear that you had felt him strongly, or at least had occupied him by threats and demonstrations. You have been at least his equal, and I suppose superior in numbers. Has he not stolen a march and sent reinforcements towards Manassas Junction? A week is enough to win victories." Patterson was touched by the implied censure and answered restively: "The enemy has stolen no march upon me. I have kept him actively employed, and by threats and reconnaissances in force caused him to be reinforced." But the facts did not bear out the assertion. The enemy was at that moment making the stolen march which Scott feared, and of which Patterson remained in profound ignorance till 2 days later. Since the 9th of July, his readiness to offer battle or to strike when the proper moment should arrive had oozed away. He became clamorous for reinforcements and profuse of complaints. Making no energetic reconnaissance to learn the truth, and crediting every exaggerated rumor, he became impressed that he was in face of an enemy far superior in numbers. Understanding perfectly the nature and importance of his assigned task, and admitting in his dispatches that "this force is the keystone of the combined movements," ambitious to perform a brilliant act and commanding abundant means to execute his plan, his energy failed in the trying moment. "Tomorrow I advance to Bunker Hill," he reported on July 14, "preparatory to the other movement. If an opportunity offers, I shall attack." Reaching Bunker Hill on the 15th, he was within 9 miles of the enemy. His opportunity was at hand. Johnston had only 12,000 men, all told; Patterson from 18,000 to 22,000. All that and the following day he must have been torn by conflicting emotions. He was both seeking and avoiding a battle. He had his orders written out for an attack, but it would appear that his chief of staff, Fitz John Porter, together with Colonels J. Abercrombie and George H. Thomas, at the last moment persuaded him to change his mind. Making only a slight reconnaissance on the 16th, he late that night countermanded his orders, and on July 17 marched to Charlestown, nominally as a flank movement, but practically in retreat. Johnston, the Confederate commander, was at Winchester in daily anticipation of Patterson's attack, when at midnight of July 17 he received orders to go at once to the help of Beauregard at Manassas. By 9 o'clock on the morning of the 18th, his scouts brought him information that Patterson's army was at Charlestown. Relieved thus unexpectedly from a menace of danger which otherwise he could neither have resisted nor escaped, he lost no time. At noon of the same day he had his whole effective force of 9,000 men on the march. By noon of Saturday, July 20, 6,000 of them, with 20 guns, were in Beauregard's camp at Bull Run, ready to resist McDowell's attack. The Union army lay encamped about Centreville. From there, the Warrenton Turnpike ran westward over a stone bridge, crossing Bull Run to Gainesville, several miles beyond. Unaware that Johnston had joined Beauregard, McDowell desired to seize Gainesville, a station on the railroad, to prevent such a junction. The stone bridge was thought to be defended in force, besides being mined, ready to be blown up. The engineers, however, late on Saturday, obtained information that Sudley Ford, 2 or 3 miles above, could be readily carried and crossed by an attacking column. On Saturday night, therefore, McDowell called his officers together and announced his plan of battle for the following day. Tyler's division was ordered to advance on the Warrenton Turnpike and threaten the stone bridge, while Hunter and Heintzelman, with their divisions, should make a circuitous and secret night march, seize and cross Sudley Ford, and descending on the enemy's side of Bull Run, should carry the batteries at the stone bridge by a rear attack, whereby Tyler would be able to cross and join in the main battle. Beauregard, on his part, also planned an aggressive movement for that same Sunday morning. No sooner had Johnston arrived than he proposed that the Confederates should sally from their intrenchments, cross the 5 fords of Bull Run they were guarding, march by the various converging roads to Centreville, and surprise and crush the Union army in its camps. The orders for such an advance and attack were duly written out, and Johnston, as ranking officer, signed his approval of them in the gray twilight of Sunday morning. But it proved wasted labor. At sunrise, Tyler's signal guns announced the Union advance and attack. The original plan was thereupon abandoned, and Beauregard proposed a modification: to stand on the defensive with their left flank at the stone bridge and attack with their right from the region of Blackburn's Ford. This suggestion against Johnston adopted and ordered to be carried out. There had been confusion and delay in the outset of McDowell's march, and the flanking route around by Sudley Ford had proved unexpectedly long. Tyler's feigned attack at the stone bridge was so feeble and inefficient that it betrayed its object. The real attack by Hunter and Heintzelman, designed to begin at daylight, could not be made until near 11 o'clock. The first sharp encounter took place about 2/3 of a mile north of the Warrenton Turnpike, some 5 regiments on each side being engaged. The rebels tenaciously held their line for an hour, but the Union column was constantly swelling with arriving batteries and regiments. Tyler's division found a ford, and crossing Bull Run a short distance above the stone bridge, 3 of its brigades joined Hunter and Heintzelman. About 12 o'clock, the Confederate line, composed mainly of Johnston's troops, wavered and broke, and was swept back across and out of the valley of the Warrenton Turnpike and down the road running southward from Sudley Ford to Manassas Junction. The commanders and other officers on both sides were impressed with the conviction that this conflict of the forenoon had decided the fortunes of the day. Beauregard's plan to make a counterattack from his right flank against Centreville had failed through a miscarriage of orders, and leaving Johnston at headquarters to watch the entire field, he hastened personally to endeavor to check the tide of defeat. Brigadier General T.J. Jackson, who on this field gained his sobriquet of Stonewall, had already formed his fresh brigade, also of Johnston's army, on the crest of a ridge known as the Henry Hill, half a mile south of the Warrenton Turnpike. Other regiments and batteries were hurried up until they constituted a semicircular line of 12 regiments, 22 guns, and 2 companies of cavalry, strongly posted and well hidden in the edge of a piece of woods behind the screen of a thick growth of young pines. At half past 2 o'clock in the afternoon, McDowell attacked this second position of the enemy with an immediately available force of about 14 regiments, 24 guns, and a single battalion of cavalry. Here the advantages of position were all strongly against him. The enemy was posted, concealed, and his artillery concentrated, while McDowell's brigades were at the foot of the hill, not only where the ascent must be made in open view, but where the nature of the ground rendered a united advance impossible. A series of successive and detached assaults followed. 2 batteries that had been posted near the crest of the hill in advance of the main body of infantry were lost by mistaking a rebel for a Union regiment, and because of the lax organization and want of discipline in the raw volunteer regiments, the strength of McDowell's command melted away in a rapid demoralization. The scales of victory, however, yet vibrated in uncertainty, until at 4 in the afternoon the remainder of Johnston's army arrived, and 7 fresh rebel regiments were thrown against the extreme right and partly in rear of the Union line. This heavy numerical overweight at a decisive time and place terminated the battle very suddenly. The abundant rumors that Johnston was coming to the help of Beauregard seemed verified, and the Union regiments, ignorant of the fact that they had been successfully fighting part of his force all day, were seized with a panic and began by a common impulse to move in retreat. The suddenness of their victory was as unexpected to the rebel as to the Union commanders. Jefferson Davis, who had come from Richmond, arriving at Manassas at 4 o'clock, was informed that the battle was lost, and was implored by his companions not to endanger his personal safety by riding to the front. Nevertheless, he persisted, and was overjoyed to find that the Union army had, by a sudden and unexplained impulse, half run, half marched from the field. The rebel detachments of cavalry hung about the line of retreat, but they dared not venture a serious attack, and so unconvinced were they as yet of the final result, that night the rebel commanders set a strong and vigilant guard in all directions against the expected return and offensive operations by McDowell next morning. The precaution was needless, for the Union army was so much demoralized that the commanders deemed it unsafe to make a stand at Centreville, where the reserves were posted, and a rapid though orderly retreat was continued through the night and until all organized regiments or fragments reached their old camps within the fortifications on the Potomac, and the scattered fugitives made their way across the river into the city of Washington. Patterson had been charged with the duty of defeating or holding Johnston in the Shenandoah Valley. He had a double force with which to perform his task. Had he done so, McDowell, who in that case would have been superior in numbers to Beauregard, and whose plans were in the main judicious, could easily have conquered. It was Johnston's army, which Patterson had permitted to escape, that principally fought the battle of Bull Run and defeated McDowell. Nor is there good sense in that criticism which lays the blame upon General Scott, and the administration for not having first united the two Federal armies. The administration furnished a superior force against Beauregard at Bull Run, and an overwhelming force against Johnston at Winchester, and assured victory in each locality by the only reliable condition, other things being equal, an excess of numbers. Had Patterson held his foe as he might, and McDowell defeated Beauregard as he should have done, the capture of Johnston's force between the two Federal armies was practically certain, as General Scott intended. Scott was aware of the danger which Patterson's negligence had created. It is known that a strong reinforcement left Winchester on the afternoon of the 18th, which you will also have to beat, he telegraphed McDowell on the day of the battle, when it was too late to countermand the attack. He also promised him immediate reinforcements. The confidence of the General-in-Chief remained unshaken, and he telegraphed McClellan, McDowell is this forenoon forcing the passage of Bull Run. In 2 hours he will turn the Manassas Junction and storm it today with superior force. It may well be supposed that President Lincoln suffered great anxiety during that eventful Sunday, but General Scott talked confidently of success, and Lincoln bore his impatience without any visible sign, and quietly went to church at 11 o'clock. Soon after noon, copies of telegrams began to come to him at the Executive Mansion from the War Department and from Army headquarters. They brought, however, no certain information, as they came only from the nearest station to the battlefield, and simply gave what the operator saw and heard. Towards 3 o'clock they became more frequent and reported considerable fluctuation in the apparent course and progress of the cannonade. The President went to the office of General Scott, where he found the General asleep, and woke him to talk over the news. Scott said such reports were worth nothing as indications either way, that the changes in the currents of wind and the variation of the echoes made it impossible for a distant listener to determine the course of a battle. He still expressed his confidence in a successful result, and composed himself for another nap when the President left. Dispatches continued to come about every 10 or 15 minutes, still based on hearing and hearsay, the rumors growing more cheering and definite. They reported that the battle had extended along nearly the whole line, that there had been considerable loss, but that the secession lines had been driven back 2 or 3 miles, some of the dispatches said, to the junction. One of General Scott's aides also brought the telegram of an engineer repeating that McDowell had driven the enemy before him, that he had ordered the reserves to cross Bull Run, and wanted reinforcements without delay. The aide further stated substantially that the general was satisfied of the truth of this report, and that McDowell would immediately attack and capture the junction, perhaps tonight, but certainly by tomorrow noon. Deeming all doubt at an end, President Lincoln ordered his carriage and went out to take his usual evening drive. He had not returned when at 6 o'clock Secretary Seward came to the Executive Mansion, pale and haggard. "Where is the President?" he asked hoarsely of the private secretaries. "Gone to drive," they answered. "Have you any late news?" he continued. They read him the telegrams which announced victory. "Tell no one," said he, "that is not true. The battle is lost. The telegraph says that McDowell is in full retreat and calls on General Scott to save the capital. Find the President and tell him to come immediately to General Scott's." Half an hour later the President returned from his drive, and his private secretaries gave him Seward's message, the first intimation he received of the trying news. He listened in silence, without the slightest change of feature or expression, and walked away to Army headquarters. There he read the unwelcome report in a telegram from a captain of engineers: "General McDowell's army in full retreat through Centreville. The day is lost. Save Washington and the remnants of this army. The routed troops will not reform." This information was such an irreconcilable contradiction of the former telegram that General Scott utterly refused to believe it. That one officer should report the army beyond Bull Run, driving the enemy and ordering up reserves, and another immediately report it 3 miles this side of Bull Run in hopeless retreat and demoralization, seemed an impossibility. Yet the impossible had indeed come to pass, and the apparent change of fortune had been nearly as sudden on the battlefield as in Washington. The President and the Cabinet met at General Scott's office and awaited further news in feverish suspense until a telegram from McDowell confirmed the disaster. Discussion was now necessarily turned to preparation for the future. All available troops were hurried forward to McDowell's support. Baltimore was put on the alert. Telegrams were sent to the recruiting stations of the nearest Northern states to lose no time in sending all their organized regiments to Washington. McClellan was ordered to come down to the Shenandoah Valley with such troops as can be spared from Western Virginia. A great number of civilians, newspaper correspondents, and several senators and representatives had followed McDowell's army to Centreville. Representative Alfred Ely of New York went to the battlefield itself and was captured and sent for a long sojourn in Libby Prison at Richmond. Such of these non-combatants as had been fortunate enough to keep their horses and vehicles were the first to reach Washington, arriving about midnight. President Lincoln had returned to the Executive Mansion, and reclining on a lounge in the Cabinet room, he heard from several of these eyewitnesses their excited and exaggerated narratives, in which the rush and terror and unseemly stampede of lookers-on and army teamsters were altogether disproportionate and almost exclusive features. The President did not go to his bed that night. Morning found him still on his lounge in the Executive office, hearing repetitions of these recitals and making memoranda of his own conclusions. As the night elapsed, the news seemed to grow worse. McDowell's first dispatch stated that he would hold Centreville. His second that the larger part of the men are a confused mob, entirely demoralized. But he said that he would attempt to make a stand at Fairfax Courthouse. His third reported from that point that many of the volunteers did not wait for authority to proceed to the Potomac, but left on their own decision. They are now pouring through this place in a state of utter disorganization. I think now, as all of my commanders thought at Centreville, there is no alternative but to fall back to the Potomac. Reports from other points generally confirmed the prevalence of confusion and disorganization. Monday morning, the scattered fugitives reached the bridges over the Potomac and began rushing across them into Washington. It was a gloomy and dismal day. A drizzling rain set in which lasted 36 hours. Many a panic-stricken volunteer remembered afterwards with gratitude that when he was wandering footsore, exhausted, and hungry through the streets of the capital, her loyal families opened their cheerful doors to give him food, rest, and encouragement. One of the principal reasons which prevented McDowell's making a stand at Centreville or Fairfax Courthouse was the important fact that the term of service of the 3 months militia, organized under President Lincoln's first proclamation, was about to expire. In the next few days, says McDowell in his report, day by day, I should have lost 10,000 of the best armed, drilled, officered, and disciplined troops in the army. This vital consideration equally affected the armies at other points, and bearing it, as well as the local exigency, in mind, the President and the Cabinet determined on several changes of army leadership. McDowell was continued in command on the Virginia side of the Potomac, with 15 regiments to defend and hold the forts. McClellan was called to Washington to take local command, and more especially to organize a new army out of the 3 years' regiments, which were just beginning to come in from the various states. Patterson was only a 3 months general, appointed by the governor of Pennsylvania. His time expired, and he was mustered out of service. Banks was sent to Harper's Ferry to succeed him. Dix was put in command at Baltimore, and Rosecrans in Western Virginia. By noon of Monday the worst aspects of the late defeat were known, and especially the reassuring fact that the enemy was making no pursuit, and so far as possible immediate dangers were provided against. The War Department was soon able to reply to anxious inquiries from New York. Our loss is much less than was at first represented, and the troops have reached the forts in much better condition than we expected. We are making most vigorous efforts to concentrate a large and irresistible army at this point. Regiments are arriving. Our works on the south bank of the Potomac are impregnable, being well manned with reinforcements. The capital is safe. On the following day, Lincoln in person visited some of the forts and camps about Arlington Heights and addressed the regiments with words of cheer and confidence. Compared with the later battles of the Civil War, the Battle of Bull Run involved but a very moderate loss in men and material. Its political and moral results, however, were widespread and enduring. The fact that the rebel army suffered about equal damage in numbers of killed and wounded, and that it was crippled so as to be unable for months to resume the offensive, could not be immediately known. The flushed hope of the South magnified the achievement as a demonstration of Southern invincibility. The event of a pitched battle, won, gave the rebellion and the Confederate government a standing and a sudden respectability before foreign powers it had hardly dared hope for. With the then personal government of France, and with the commercial classes whose influence always rules the government of England, it gained at once a scarcely disguised active sympathy. Upon the irritated susceptibilities, the wounded loyalty, the sanguine confidence of the North, the Bull Run defeat fell with cruel bitterness. The eager hopes built on the victories in Western Virginia were dashed to the ground. Here was a fresher and deeper humiliation than Sumter or Baltimore. But though her nerves winced, her will never faltered. She was both chastened and strengthened in the trial. For the moment, however, irritation and disappointment found vent in loud complaint and blind recrimination. One or two curious incidents in this ordeal of criticism may perhaps be cited. A few days after the battle, in a conversation at the White House with several Illinois members of Congress, in the presence of the President and the Secretary of War, General Scott himself was so far nettled by the universal chagrin and fault-finding that he lost his temper and sought an entirely uncalled for self-justification. "Sir, I am the greatest coward in America," said he. "I will prove it. I have fought this battle, sir, against my judgment. I think the President of the United States ought to remove me today for doing it. As God is my judge, after my superiors had determined to fight it, I did all in my power to make the army efficient. I deserve removal because I did not stand up when my army was not in a condition for fighting and resist it to the last." The President said, "Your conversation seems to imply that I forced you to fight this battle." General Scott then said, "I have never served a President who has been kinder to me than you have been." Representative William A. Richardson, who in a complaining speech in Congress related the scene, then drew the inference that Scott intended to pay a personal compliment to Mr. Lincoln, but that he did not mean to exonerate the Cabinet, and when pressed by questions further explained, "Let us have no misunderstanding about this matter. My colleagues understood that I gave the language as near as I could. Whether I have been correctly reported or not, I do not know. If I did not then make the correct statement, let me do it now. I did not understand General Scott, nor did I mean so to be understood as implying that the President had forced him to fight that battle." The incident illustrates how easily history may be perverted by hot-blooded criticism. Scott's irritation drove him to an inaccurate statement of events. Richardson's partisanship warped Scott's error to a still more unjustifiable deduction, and both reasoned from a changed condition of things. 2 weeks before, Scott was confident of victory, and Richardson chafing at military inaction. Historical judgment of war is subject to an inflexible law, either very imperfectly understood or very constantly lost sight of. Military writers love to fight over the campaigns of history exclusively by the rules of the professional chessboard, always subordinating, often totally ignoring the element of politics. This is a radical error. Every war is begun, dominated, and ended by political considerations. Without a nation, without a government, without money or credit, without popular enthusiasm, which furnishes volunteers, or public support, which endures conscription, there could be no army and no war, neither beginning nor end of methodical hostilities. War and politics, campaign and statecraft are Siamese twins, inseparable and interdependent. And to talk of military operations without the direction and interference of an administration is as absurd as to plan a campaign without recruits, pay, or rations. Applied to the Bull Run campaign, this law of historical criticism analyzes and fixes the responsibilities of government and commanders with easy precision. When Lincoln, on June 29, assembled his council of war, the commanders, as military experts, correctly decided that the existing armies, properly handled, could win a victory at Manassas and a victory at Winchester at or near the same time. General Scott correctly objected that these victories, if won, would not be decisive, and that in a military point of view it would be wiser to defer any offensive campaign until the following autumn. Here the President and the Cabinet, as political experts, intervened, and on their part decided correctly that the public temper would not admit of such a delay. Thus the administration was responsible for the forward movement, Scott for the combined strategy of the two armies, McDowell for the conduct of the Bull Run battle, Patterson for the escape of Johnston, and Fate for the panic. For the opposing forces were equally raw, equally undisciplined, and as a whole fought the battle with equal courage and gallantry. But such an analysis of causes and such an apportionment of responsibilities could not be made by the public or even by the best informed individuals beyond Cabinet circles in the first fortnight succeeding the Bull Run disaster. All was confused rumor, blind inference, seething passion. That the public at large and the touch-and-go newspaper writers should indulge in harsh and hasty language is scarcely to be wondered at. But the unseemly and precipitate judgments and criticisms of those holding the rank of leadership in public affairs are less to be excused. Men were not yet tempered to the fiery ordeal of revolution, and still thought and spoke under the strong impulse of personal prejudice, and with that untamed extravagance which made politics such a chaos in the preceding winter. That feeling momentarily quelled and repressed by the rebel guns at Sumter was now in danger of breaking out afresh. In illustration, we need only to cite the words of prominent leaders in the three parties of the North, namely, Stanton, late Buchanan's Attorney General, had destined soon to become famous as Lincoln's War Secretary. Richardson, who had been the trusted lieutenant of Douglas, and now, since Douglas was dead, the ostensible spokesman of the faction which had followed that leader, and thirdly, Horace Greeley, exercising so prominent an influence upon the public opinion of the country through the columns of the Tribune. The Buchanan cabinet was still writhing under the odium which fell upon the late administration, and much more severely upon the Breckinridge Democracy. Mr. Buchanan and his cabinet were eager to seize upon every shadow of self-justification, and naturally not slow to emphasize any apparent shortcoming of their successors. Stanton, with his impulsive nature, was especially severe on the new President and administration. In his eyes, the only hope of the country lay in the members of Buchanan's reconstructed cabinet. Thus he wrote to his colleague Dix on June 11 in language that resembled a stump speech of the presidential campaign. No one can imagine the deplorable condition of this city and the hazard of the government who did not witness the weakness and panic of the administration and the painful imbecility of Lincoln. We looked to New York in that dark hour as our only deliverance under Providence, and thank God it came. But when we witness venality and corruption growing in power every day and controlling the millions of money that should be a patriotic sacrifice for national deliverance and treating the treasure of the nation as a booty to be divided among thieves, hope dies away. Deliverance from this danger also must come from New York. Of military affairs I can form no judgment. Every day affords fresh proof of the design to give the war a party direction. The army appointments appear, with 2 or 3 exceptions only, to be bestowed on persons whose only claim is their republicanism, broken-down politicians without experience, ability, or any other merit. Democrats are rudely repulsed or scowled upon with jealous and ill-concealed aversion. The Western democracy are already becoming disgusted, and between the corruption of some of the Republican leaders and the self-seeking ambition of others, some great disaster may soon befall the nation. How long will the democracy of New York tolerate these things? We hoped to see you here, especially after you had accepted the appointment of Major General, but now that the administration has got over its panic, you are not the kind of man that would be welcome. This letter plainly enough shows Mr. Stanton's attitude towards the new administration. His letter of the following day to ex-President Buchanan reveals the state of feeling entertained by Dix. The recent appointments in the Army are generally spoken of with great disapprobation. General Dix is very much chagrined with the treatment he has received from the War Department, and on Saturday I had a letter declaring his intention to resign immediately. Again, July 16. General Dix is still here. He has been shamefully treated by the administration. We are expecting a general battle to be commenced at Fairfax today, and conflicting opinions of the result are entertained. And once more on July 26. The dreadful disaster of Sunday can scarcely be mentioned. The imbecility of this administration culminated in that catastrophe. An irretrievable misfortune and national disgrace never to be forgotten are to be added to the ruin of all peaceful pursuits and national bankruptcy as a result of Lincoln's running the machine for 5 months. You perceive that Bennett is for a change in the Cabinet and proposes for one of the new Cabinet, Mr. Holt. It is not unlikely that some change in the War and Navy departments may take place, but none beyond these 2 departments until Jefferson Davis turns out the whole concern. The capture of Washington seems now to be inevitable. During the whole of Monday and Tuesday it might have been taken without any resistance. The rout, overthrow, and utter demoralization of the whole army is complete. Even now I doubt whether any serious opposition to the entrance of the Confederate forces could be offered. While Lincoln, Scott, and the Cabinet are disputing who is to blame, the city is unguarded and the enemy at hand. General McClellan reached here last evening, but if he had the ability of Caesar, Alexander, or Napoleon, what can he accomplish? Will not Scott's jealousy, Cabinet intrigues, Republican interference thwart him at every step? While hoping for the best, I cannot shut my eyes against the dangers that beset the government, and especially this city. It is certain that Davis was in the field on Sunday, and the secessionists here assert that he headed in person the last victorious charge. General Dix is in Baltimore. After 3 weeks' neglect and insult, he was sent there. While Stanton and Dix were thus nursing their secret griefs on behalf of one of the late political factions, Richardson, as the spokesman of the Douglas wing of the Democracy, was indulging in loud complaints for the other, charging that the division of the Democratic Party at Charleston had brought the present calamity upon the Union. He continued, this organization of the Breckinridge Party was for the purpose of destroying the government. That was its purpose and its object. What do we see? Without the aid and cooperation of the men of the North, that party was powerless. The men from the northern states who aided and encouraged this organization, which is in rebellion, are at the head today of our army. Butler of Massachusetts, Dix of New York, and Patterson of Pennsylvania, and Cadwalader, all of them in this movement to break down and disorganize the Democratic Party and the country. Why is it? This Douglas party furnished you 1/2 of your entire army. Where is your general? Where is your man in command today who belongs to that party? Why is this? Have you Republicans sympathized with this Breckinridge party? Are you sympathizing with them and lending your aid to the men who lead our armies into misfortune and disgrace? Richardson was easily answered. A member correctly replied that these and other 3 months' generals had been selected by the governors of various States, and not by the President. Moreover, that Patterson had been specially recommended by General Scott, whom Richardson was eulogizing, and that there would be plenty of opportunity before the war was over for the Douglas men to win honors in the field. But all this did not soothe Richardson's temper, which was roused mainly by his revived factional jealousy. Unjust fault-finding was to be expected from party opponents, but it is not too much to say that it was a genuine surprise to the President to receive from a party friend and the editor of the most influential newspaper in the Union the following letter, conveying an indirect accusation of criminal indifference and proposing an immediate surrender to rebellion and consent to permanent disunion. New York, Monday, July 29, 1861, midnight. Dear Sir, this is my 7th sleepless night. Yours too, doubtless. Yet I think I shall not die, because I have no right to die. I must struggle to live, however bitterly. But to business. You are not considered a great man, and I am a hopelessly broken one. You are now undergoing a terrible ordeal, and God has thrown the gravest responsibilities upon you. Do not fear to meet them. Can the rebels be beaten after all that has occurred, and in view of the actual state of feeling caused by our late awful disaster? If they can, and it is your business to ascertain and decide, write me that such is your judgment, so that I may know and do my duty. And if they cannot be beaten, if our recent disaster is fatal, do not fear to sacrifice yourself to your country. If the rebels are not to be beaten, if that is your judgment in view of all the light you can get, then every drop of blood henceforth shed in this quarrel will be wantonly, wickedly shed, and the guilt will rest heavily on the soul of every promoter of the crime. I pray you to decide quickly and let me know my duty. If the Union is irrevocably gone, an armistice for 30, 60, 90, 120 days, better still for a year, ought at once to be proposed with a view to a peaceful adjustment. Then Congress should call a national convention to meet at the earliest possible day, and there should be an immediate and mutual exchange or release of prisoners and a disbandment of forces. I do not consider myself at present a judge of anything but the public sentiment. That seems to me everywhere gathering and deepening against a prosecution of the war. The gloom in this city is funereal, for our dead at Bull Run were many, and they lie unburied yet. On every brow sits sullen, scorching, black despair. It would be easy to have Mr. Crittenden move any proposition that ought to be adopted, or to have it come from any proper quarter. The first point is to ascertain what is best that can be done, which is the measure of our duty, and do that very thing at the earliest moment. This letter is written in the strictest confidence and is for your eye alone, but you are at liberty to say to members of your cabinet that you know I will second any move you may see fit to make. But do nothing timidly nor by halves. Send me word what to do. I will live till I can hear it at all events. If it is best for the country and for mankind that we make peace with the rebels at once and on their own terms, do not shrink even from that. But bear in mind the greatest truth. Whoso would lose his life for my sake shall save it. Do the thing that is the highest right, and tell me how I am to second you. Yours in the depths of bitterness, Horace Greeley. These few citations are noteworthy because of the high quarters whence they emanated, and the subsequent relations some of their authors bore to the war. They give us penetrating glimpses of how the Bull Run disaster was agitating the public opinion of the North. But it must not be hastily inferred that such was the preponderant feeling. The great tides of patriotism settled quickly back to their usual level. The Army, Congress, and the people took up, a shade less buoyantly, but with a deeper energy, the determined prosecution of the war, and continued their confidence in the President, Cabinet, and military authorities. The war governors tendered more troops and hurried forward their equipped regiments. The administration pushed the organization of the long-term volunteers, and out of the scattered debris of the Bull Run forces there sprang that magnificent Army of the Potomac, which in a long and fluctuating career won such heroic renown. Meanwhile, in this first shadow of defeat, President Lincoln maintained his wonted equipoise of manner and speech. A calm and resolute patience was his most constant mood. To follow with watchfulness the details of the accumulation of a new army was his most eager occupation. He smiled at frettings like those of Scott, Dix, and Richardson, but letters like that of Greeley made him sigh at the strange weakness of human character. Such things gave him pain, but they bred no resentment and elicited no reply. Already at this period he began the display of that rare ability in administration which enabled him to smooth mountains of obstacles and bridge rivers of difficulty in his control of men. From this time onward to the end of the war, his touch was daily and hourly amidst the vast machinery of command and coordination in Cabinet, Congress, Army, Navy, and the hosts of national politics, to still the quarrels of factions, to allay the jealousies of statesmen, to compose the rivalries of generals, to soothe the vanity of officials, to prompt the laggard, to curb the ardent, to sustain the faltering, was a substratum of daily routine underlying the great events of campaigns, battles, and high questions of state. On the night following the Battle of Bull Run, while Lincoln lay awake on a sofa in the executive office, waiting to gather what personal information he could from the many officers and civilians who were arriving at Washington after their flight from the battlefield, he began sketching a pencil memorandum of the policy and military program most expedient to be adopted in the new condition of affairs. This sketch or outline he added to from time to time during the succeeding days. On the 23rd and 27th days of July, he seems to have matured his reflections on the late disaster, and with his own hand he carefully copied his memorandum in this completed form. July 23, 1861. 1. Let the plan for making the blockade effective be pushed forward with all possible dispatch. 2. Let the volunteer forces at Fort Monroe and vicinity under General Butler be constantly drilled, disciplined, and instructed without more for the present. 3. Let Baltimore be held as now, with a gentle but firm and certain hand. 4. Let the force now under Patterson or Banks be strengthened and made secure in its position. 5. Let the forces in Western Virginia act till further orders according to instructions or orders from General McClellan. 6. General Fremont push forward his organization and operations in the West as rapidly as possible, giving rather special attention to Missouri. 7. Let the forces late before Manassas, except the 3 months' men, be reorganized as rapidly as possible in their camps here and about Arlington. 8. Let the 3 months' forces who decline to enter the longer service be discharged as rapidly as circumstances will permit. 9. Let the new volunteer forces be brought forward as fast as possible, and especially into the camps on the 2 sides of the river here. July 27, 1861. When the foregoing shall have been substantially attended to, 1. Let Manassas Junction, or some point on one or other of the railroads near it, and Strasburg be seized and permanently held, with an open line from Washington to Manassas and an open line from Harper's Ferry to Strasburg, the military men to find the way of doing these. 2. This done, a joint movement from Cairo on Memphis and from Cincinnati on East Tennessee. End of chapter 20.